I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
And we are two Shakespeare nerds who decided to make a podcast about our love for Shakespeare.
In this podcast, we will tackle as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which it was written, and how the text is viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as actors, how his plays can be responsibly performed today.
All while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to bardolatry. So, Shakespeare Anyone? Hi, listeners. Elyse here to remind you of all the ways you can support the podcast and the work that Kourtney and I do. First up, we have a Patreon. Our Patreon patrons receive exclusive bonus content. Every month, we do a roundup of Shakespeare-related content we have found online. We also share Patreon-exclusive bonus episodes of the podcast. These look like extended versions of episodes you've heard here, collaborations with other Shakespeare podcasters, and Kourtney and I doing reviews of Shakespeare-adjacent media like TV shows, movies, and books that are inspired by or loosely based on Shakespeare and Shakespeare plays. Patreon patrons also receive snail mail from the podcast, and some levels even vote on future episodes of our podcast. If you are interested in checking out our Patreon or just the Shakespeare-related names we've given the tiers of support, head to patreon.com/Shakespeare Anyone. The link is also in our episode description. After you've done that, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your review might even make it on an episode. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and tell a friend. Word of mouth is our best form of advertising. Thank you so much for all of the support you give the podcast. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Kourtney.
Hi, Elyse. Oh, no. Hi, Elyse.
Hi. How are you today?
I'm very tired. It's been a very long week. Towards the fall, everything starts to fall into like our laps as podcasters and life is getting busier. So I'm a little bit tired, to be honest.
Yeah, it's our like race to the end of the year rush right now. And I also think we were talking about this before I pressed the record button, but it's kind of incredible that here we are at the end of 3 years of making a Shakespeare podcast and our 6th play.
I can't even believe that. I feel like I was just writing the script for Titus Andronicus for our synopsis.
I feel like you just asked me if I wanted to do a podcast with you about Shakespeare, and our first one could be Macbeth. So
So it's a whirlwind. It's a whirlwind for the two of us, but
what is time?
Yeah.
But today, we are here to wrap up our series on Titus Andronicus, and we are going to do that, as always, by looking at a couple of notable productions.
That's right.
So first, we're going to be talking about Julie Taymor's 1999 film adaptation, Titus, and then we will talk about the 2017 production by the Royal Shakespeare Company, which we mentioned in an earlier episode, I believe is the one where they did the experiment with the heart rate monitors. So let's get into this Julie Taymor film.
Yeah.
Titus stars Anthony Hopkins as Titus, Jessica Lange as Tamara, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Chiron, Matthew Rhys as Demetrius, Harry Lennox as Aaron, Angus McFadden as Lucius, Alan Cumming as Saturninus, Laura Fraser as Lavinia. It was directed by Julie Taymor, as we've discussed. And let's get into it. What were your high-level impressions of?
Yeah, my high-level impressions were it's a surrealist adaptation that was part of the genre. And there were a lot of choices that were made, and some of them succeeded, others did not. I thought that, first and foremost, the acting was really great. Great cast. A lot of cuts were really great. The script was solid. I think it was a adaptation of Titus where, like, if you don't know the script, you at least know what's happening.
Yeah.
Like, my problem with it was that if it was going to be surrealist, I wanted it to stay surrealist, but it felt like there were like 5 genres happening in this one world that really confused me. And when it was simple, it really excelled. When it was making a statement, it was a little bit like confusing, a little like what is the motivation?
Yeah.
So that's really like my big takeaway from this, Titus, was it was quite an experiment, and I don't know how much of it succeeded, but there definitely were highlights.
Yeah, I had the same. I felt like it was the script and the cut of the script was really well done, and there's some rearranging that they did to like help tell the story in a better way for the film medium. As an example, they changed the order of 1-1, which is this incredibly long scene where so much happens. And they kind of actually separated out into separate scenes based on what's happening and the groups that are involved. I also found that when it was simpler, when Taymor just let these incredible actors act and say Shakespeare, it was incredible.
Yeah.
Those were the highlights. And then there were moments where I was like, I feel like we're being surreal for surrealism's sake instead of necessarily it being
informed by the story.
Yeah, informed by the story, or we have set something up and then we're not going to revisit it ever.
Yeah.
And those were all stylistic choices made on top of the really effective storytelling of the play Titus Andronicus.
Yeah. It is, at least for me, important to note that this movie came out 3 years after R+J.
Yes.
And that was very high concept Romeo and Juliet.
Taymor does surrealism in other works of hers, like across the universe. There are moments of what is happening for the sake of what is happening,
Yeah.
But I feel like it does it in a more sophisticated way, a way that of a more experienced artist. And you can definitely see, I think, some influences of R&J in some choices that are made in this.
Yeah. I wrote a couple of words to encapsulate some of my impressions of this, and I hate to be very negative about it, but I wrote gritty. Gritty was one word that stood out to me, and I don't really like gritty. I think like when I was in my early 20s, I was like, gritty plays, that's right. Like we like to do gritty plays because it was kind of the thing in that era of theater making. But now I look at gritty and I'm like, well, why are we doing this? Is this just for shock value? And I thought this came across in some scenes as gritty, a little bit pretentious, and that's a shame given all those moments you talked about that are like simple and really like let the actors lean into the text and the word and the relationships in the story.
Yeah. I do think the word that I kept writing over and over as well is brutal, which I think is true to Titus Andronicus. As Titus is a brutal script. There's a lot of violence that happens, and this piece does not shy away from the brutality of Titus Andronicus.
I agree.
Just starting from the beginning, I really liked, but I felt like this is the thing that lands in that camp of like, I really liked this. This was a surrealist thing that they did. I wish it had continued all the way through. I wish that like it had been brought full circle. Was the framing device set up at the beginning. So it starts with a kid playing with toys, a variety of toys in
like
a modern day kitchen, playing war, using ketchup as blood. It's really messy. And then a explosion goes off, and a character that we'll see later as a messenger grabs the boy and brings him out of the house, and then the house is rubble, and it's actually in the center of like a Roman Colosseum.
Right.
It set up the boy, who we later see as young Lucius, as this kind of like outside eye. I was like, oh, is this all happening in this boy's mind?
That's what I thought too. Is this a story that he is concocting?
The rest of the play kind of lives in this world of, I call it the A Knight's Tale version of medieval, where it's this elements of modern, there's elements of classical kind of melded together. And I was like, oh, and that makes sense because he's been playing with action figures and Green Army men and
like Roman soldiers, or
Roman soldier dolls,
toys.
Yeah. And robots. Like these are all his toys come to life. So cool.
Right. Yeah. Cause then once they're in the Colosseum, I actually really liked this scene. It was like a very dull, dark scene where like there are all of these soldiers who are doing like a funeral procession, I think, and it's very like static, staccato.
The music, the soundtrack slaps. This soundtrack is so good.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to start the play, especially like if you've seen the cover of Titus and like Anthony Hopkins has like blue paint and also like dried dirt on him. It's very much like, I mean, I guess I'm just thinking of like Pompeii or something like that, where you've got the bodies that are all like dried dirt and stuff.
It's the return of the soldiers from the war, so they're bringing back the war dead, and they also have Tamara, Chiron, and Demetrius and Aaron in chains being wheeled in as war prisoners. Yeah, I love that scene.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this scene unfortunately set me up for like really high expectations. And then, like you said, things didn't come full circle. Like every once in a while we would see this young boy who we didn't know yet was young Lucius, still dressed in modern dress, 1999, walking around and kind of like witnessing kind of like a voyeuristic sort of thing. And then once young Lucius becomes part of the text, he then becomes young Lucius, but then we don't really see
the boy observer again.
Yeah, we don't get any answers to this.
Nor do we like kind of see a return to the boy's world. At the end, he kind of just walks away in a very long, protracted exit.
Yeah.
I wish it had come a little bit full circle, and I wish that he had returned to the boy observer, if that was what was trying to be done.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe this is some large, like, investigation of children's play and, like, children's innate brutality and all and that like, kind of stuff.
Like war games.
War games, yeah. That's why I was thinking with that, and then we don't get any of that at the end.
Mm-hmm. Moving forward from that scene, so this is where the like kind of rearranging happens, is we see Titus's story play out all the way through bearing his sons and the sacrifice of Tamara's eldest son really clearly before we're introduced to Saturninus versus Bassianus. And I felt like the Roman politics, Saturninus v. Bassianus, is really clear and was really set up well.
Yeah, I think it was super effective. This film does a wonderful thing, which is incorporate the aspects of making a film and telling Titus versus just doing a staged filming of Titus.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's like two factions of supporters, one for Bassianus, one for Saturninus, and they're waving flags and they're like chanting.
There's parades.
There's parades. Yeah. You know, the parties are going up to the
steps of the Senate.
Yeah, the steps of the Senate. I did look up that filming location because I was like, this feels really fascist. And it turns out that it was filmed outside of one of Mussolini's big architectural like symbols.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow.
The Square Colosseum. And according to the internet, this building is an homage to the Colosseum and is a symbol of fascist architecture and propaganda, which I don't know if Taymor was trying to communicate anything in that, but they scouted and picked a place for a reason. So
I think it's interesting then to consider this very, at least like brutalist architecture, and then the Andronici home is more homey, lived in. They have more nature around them. I feel like that is an intentional choice. Whether or not like Taymor meant to link, I did feel like Saturninus was intentionally linked to fascism in some of like stylistic choices. I feel like there was that like dichotomy intentionally put into the world of the court versus the world of the Andronici.
Yeah. And speaking of aesthetics, one thing that really confused me, and I think it's because I don't think that the worlds were, I don't know. Let me just say my thing and then you can tell me your thoughts. Yeah. The costuming, the world of all of these characters as one world in one time period was really confusing to me because the Roman soldiers wore a lot of like classical style uniforms and then they showered in like a classically Roman bathhouse. The Visigoths looked like Vikings, and then Lavinia was dressed in like a Coco Chanel looking dress, and then Saturninus and Bassianus looked like in that same era, but then Chiron and Demetrius dressed like they were like 90s club kids.
They look like they're from Romeo plus Juliet.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the costuming was othering all of them from each other for reasons, but it felt like it didn't piece them together to me.
I didn't bump up against it because I went into it being like, oh, we're in that, what I call A Knight's Tale world where time period doesn't matter. We're just wearing what we want to wear. It's more about representing the person than like being in the same world.
Yeah, which I see that, considering I know what this film is supposed to be. But it was one thing that like stood out to me, was just like, if I saw stills from different scenes, I would not guess they were in the same movie.
It can feel a little bit like whiplash to see people who are so different when we're not. And I use A Knight's Tale because I think A Knight's Tale does it well. Or like Marie Antoinette, Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, where it's like, we are in Marie Antoinette's court, but there are Converse and there is pop music. And I think that this was just maybe too many things.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't mind that. I don't mind anachronism. I mean, heck, Shakespeare uses anachronisms all the time, like referencing like clocks chiming or whatever in Julius Caesar when they would have used sundials. So I don't actually care about anachronism. I guess my thing is I wanted it to make sense. Like you said, like too much was happening. It was like an aesthetic whiplash for me. It was just like,
yeah,
where are we? What are we doing? What's happening right now? So
yeah, and I think Taymor as a director tends to like leaving audiences sometimes, and that's where like, where are we? What are we doing? State? I mean, like I'm like, yeah, yeah, and maybe it was intentional. You know,
I mean, it might have been, but that's just an observation.
But I want to go back to Demetrius and Chiron. I found like they came across very much teenagers, young kids, impressionable. And in that way, yeah, they're going to follow what Aaron says.
One thing that I was like really aware of, or hyper aware of, Saturninus, Chiron, and Demetrius, they were like quite effeminate, which is fine. But they ended up being like three of the most vicious, evil characters in the play. And that was something that really rubbed me the wrong way. It was like Chiron and Demetrius being young and impressionable. I was like, hell yeah, that's great. But they kind of could have read as like queer, bi, something like that. And the characters that were more traditionally masculine were like the good characters.
Yeah.
And so I might just be reading too much into it, but it just felt like all three of them, they were given this like overly sexual, maybe like crossing a line in terms of the straight, you know.
I think that like this piece really plays into the goths being overtly sexual, more feminine, that is what Tamara brings into the world of Rome, and that's why she's so they're depraved. But I think that this kind of leans on that. Also, I found this production to also set up the Andronici to not be completely empathetic. For a while, I was like, who are we supposed to be rooting for here?
I jumped us ahead too far, but we can go back to the Senate. We can go back to the politics of the play and move a little bit more linearly for our listeners.
I really kind of go from, the dynamics that are set up in the beginning and the politics and the kind of difference between Tamara and Saturninus's court, having a party versus like the reality that the Andronici are living with, where they are arguing in a tomb over the fallout from what is Act 1, Scene 1. And I thought that was a really good way of showing the difference between Tamara and Saturninus do not care about the Andronici, and the Andronici are made miserable and are infighting.
Yeah.
I think it did a good job of showing how much Titus Andronicus wants to get back into Saturninus's good graces at this beginning, before the hunt and the rape of Lavinia.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that one choice I didn't really like was that early on, when Saturninus is crowned emperor, there's this shot where we see Titus see Bassianus and Lavinia kiss, and he notices them. And then Saturninus asks for Lavinia and says, do you approve of this?
Yep.
And then he goes, hey, or it'd be an honor or whatever he says. And I was just like, why would you, I'm supposed to like Titus. Why would you make him see Lavinia with Bassianus and then have him approve her being Saturninus's?
Yeah, I want to say I did like how much this film showed that Bassianus and Lavinia were together.
Same. I liked that as well.
Because I think that the script as is ambiguous as whether or not he and the brothers are just like, no, we don't want Saturninus and we prefer Bassianus.
Or whether Lavinia has a choice in this matter.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I liked that part, but I didn't like Titus seeing it. Because
it did make me go, who are we supposed to be rooting for? I don't know. I feel like I'm supposed to be like caring about how badly the Goths have been treated at this moment.
Yeah, like you mentioned how much Titus wants to get back into the good graces of the Goths. There's this scene where I believe it's after Lavinia and Bassianus have ran away and, been retrieved, but Titus is really moping about his position and he's sitting in these Roman ruins.
Yes.
And the Goths and Saturninus are partying and they come down. I'll find a day to massacre them all. That scene was a great scene. And I loved Jessica Lange looking into the camera and say, I'll find a day to massacre them all.
Yes. That, and then as that ended, she's climbing stairs and we see her climbing stairs and we hear Aaron starting his speech that begins, now Tamara climbs Mount Olympus. I'm paraphrasing there.
Yeah.
I was like, man, like I feel like I'm supposed to be rooting for Tamara and Aaron right now. Because I also don't like Titus right now. I think they also, kind of really lean into how terrible Bassianus and Lavinia are to Tamara and Aaron when they discover them during the hunt. I was like, they really make them jerks.
Yes.
I liked that Lavinia's injuries were symbolic. Lavinia, when her hands are cut off, they are replaced with like twigs. And it creates this extra, it's extra brutal.
I thought it was a really cool idea, but upon execution, I think that it kind of for me detracted. I want somewhere between blood everywhere and very much making it obvious that this is what happened to her. And then this very brutal symbolism.
Yeah.
Because she's standing on a stump in a field, a very vacant field. Chiron and Demetrius run away and she's in this in a slip. And her hair is disheveled. She's been ravished that way. And then her hands are it's quite grotesque, actually, the spiny kind of branches that are her fingers.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gut punch. I do like that we see the boy we've talked about, who up until this point has been an observer, go to a doll maker and get wooden hands for her. And then that's kind of the moment that he becomes young Lucius. She is given these prosthetic hands. And I was like, oh, actually, I liked that choice. I
liked that idea.
I
liked that choice as well.
It allowed for us to more readily see the kind of signs that Titus talks about her having.
I liked that one as well. It was a symbolization of some sort, maybe, that really made sense to me. And it wasn't gruesome. And also he played with toys at the top and now he's got doll hands.
And this is kind of the point where we get into this simplicity that we've been talking about. And that maybe it's because we're with the Andronici for so long, because basically from when Marcus discovers Lavinia and brings her home to when she, writes in the sand, it's mostly pretty simple. Just actors saying Shakespeare. That's really nice.
Yeah, usually it's quite successful when you just let the text and the actors
say good text. And then we go into the orgy, which is flashing us back to what's been going on at court for Tamara and Saturninus. And I feel like the intent, for me, it felt out of place because we just hadn't seen them in so long. So it was wait, where are we? And why are there naked bodies everywhere? And I think the intent was to try and show how depraved Rome has become with Tamara and Saturninus at the helm. This is what they're doing. But the scene right before that is Titus and young Lucius going around town and gathering supporters. And that is a scene that's I would say kind of half lives in this kind of simple world that we've been in and in this absurdist, because it feels fun. It feels like a grandpa and his grandson playing a game. And then all of a sudden it's titties.
Yeah. It felt very jarring to me. And I'm not a prude, but it's also it's one of those things where I was like, what purpose does this serve besides, you're saying, show the depravity of the Visigoths? And I think at that point we already understood. We already understand. And also, it's also oh, are you shaming people who engage in this kind of
sexuality?
Sexual. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially because there was a moment where Chiron and Demetrius were in bed or on the bed with Saturninus and Tamara. And I was just what kind of family, I guess there might be some textual implications of them having inappropriate mother-son relationships, but it was just like a lot, like it felt out of place. It felt like gratuitous versus intentional. Or I mean, it's probably intentional, but it felt gratuitous versus informed by the text.
Yeah.
And I feel like for me as a viewer, like the way that I'm piecing together like morality, good and bad.
Yeah.
In this play is like, oh, the people who mutilated and sexually assaulted, the girl is the one who has orgies and does gay stuff and has an inappropriate relationship with their parent. So it's just
right, lumping all of that into these people who are rapists and tying sexuality and even promiscuity to people who commit acts of mutilation and rape is problematic. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. And
and moving forward to revenge, murder, and rape, Chiron and Demetrius are dressed as drag queens. And then you don't see on the Andronicus side of it anyone being effeminate if they are male presenting.
And literally the only woman can't speak.
So
I didn't get much madness from Titus. False madness.
I think I saw them playing at some madness, like him yelling out the window.
Yeah.
But
that was it. He seemed with it the whole time, which I didn't mind.
Yeah. And that could be for us as the audience and be in on the joke or the plot. We're in on the, exactly. We're in on the plot versus trying to genuinely feign madness. And then the reveal is, aha, when he's going to cut the throats of the boys. Yeah. I'll admit by this part of the movie, I was a bit bored. I hate saying that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of also, the revenge, we're talking about revenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also kind of tuned out and I was just like, what is this? Why do they seem to be appearing as a fever dream? Oh, and then they're actually here.
Yes.
It was more like, maybe not bored, but tiresome.
Yeah, maybe so.
Because I did key back in during the dinner.
Yeah, I think I keyed back in around the time that Demetrius and Chiron's throats were being cut because it's always a joyous time to get to that and be like, goodbye.
Bye.
But yeah, and then we get to the dinner the dinner scene.
Which had some choices. One choice that I liked was Lavinia seeming to consent to how she would die.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that feels very actually for this movie up until this point, seems very forward thinking. He has interpreted her signs correctly.
Yeah.
And she is in his arms for him to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to talk about the pies for a second.
This is one of the few Shakespeare plays with meat pies. I think that you can talk about some human meat pies.
Okay. First of all, they're enormous. And there's two of them. And I don't know. It seems like a lot. I looked at those two boys and I was like, that's not,
they're scrawny.
There's no way.
They're
very scrawny. They're small. Jonathan Rhys Meyers is not in Bend It Like Beckham shape. He's not in Tudor shape yet. He is a baby.
Yeah, they were little skinny minis.
Was there really that much meat on those two boys? Then I was like, oh, if I hadn't been squeamish already from the blood and guts of this play, on top of all that, it didn't seem like the pie was cooked through.
Which would never work on Great British Bake Off.
Oh my gosh, Paul Hollywood and Prue wouldn't eat that. It was pink in the middle.
Yeah, they look at it and be like, I can't do it.
I can't eat that. It's ground meat and it's pink in the middle.
It's like, Titus, we're so sorry, but we are sending you home.
We're sending you home. It's raw. Gordon Ramsay would be like, it's raw. And he would send it back. And then the deaths happen really quickly, which is true. Mm-hmm. And then when we return to the Colosseum and this kind of all played out in front of Roman citizens.
Yeah.
Audience members.
Yeah. I wrote down that the banquet scene in the Colosseum is like a piece of theater for everyone to see.
And then so was this whole thing a piece of theater because we've returned to the Colosseum?
Right. The first location.
And then I expected to do the reverse because we were like, okay, now we're back in the Colosseum.
Let's step away to wrap up.
Yeah. And then instead we just like watched the boy walk out of the Colosseum for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, with Aaron's baby. It's minutes of him walking into like the sunset or like something like that. To no destination.
Just escaping this world. And rewatching the beginning again, knowing how it ended, I was like, oh, Titus at first is like addresses Romans. There's people we can't see here. So I was like, that is like a nice full circle for the Colosseum. I wanted a full circle for the boy.
But the boy, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
But yeah, that's that movie.
Yeah.
So RSC.
Yeah.
My general thoughts were, there were things I enjoyed. I struggled with this production, to be very honest, because the version of it that I watched, where it was uploaded, seemed to have trouble with the sound. So that took me out of it.
Yeah, understandably.
But overall, much like Taymor's, there were things that I enjoyed, and there were things that I didn't enjoy with this.
Same.
This began with a 4-minute long movement sequence, is what I called it.
Yeah, it did. Sometimes I think that those kinds of choices should be left to the cinema, where we expect ourselves to be walking down a street and having these movement pieces that are like grounded in the fact that you're making a movie. Like a lot of the times, like with Midsummer, one of the really successful parts of the Midsummer film that we watched was that they incorporated locations and sequences where like servants are getting the wedding festivities ready, you know, like, but that's how movies function. It's showing, not saying. This seems like this would be like really successful in a film medium.
It felt too long for me.
Too long. And I already understood what was happening in this Rome at the 10-second mark.
I was like, oh, is this setting up characters? Kind of, but not completely.
No.
It basically sets up that there are different factions that are fighting, and that's it. I was like, this could have been cut in half, and I would have gotten the world that we're in is a world divided.
Yeah. I wrote in my notes, IMO, please just start the play. That's how I was feeling.
Just get Marcus up there.
Yeah. And I think that like Taymor's, this play did a really good job of setting up the politics of the play.
Yes.
And I think that they really built the Saturninus versus Bassianus as character types. Saturninus being the like ego-inflated brother.
He's the career politician.
He's the career politician.
Yeah. We should also say this is very much set in a sort of modern world in like, I would say either late 2010s or early 2020s.
Yeah.
And Bassianus is it set up to be more of a grassroots organizer. Seeing 1-1 essentially as written is something. That is a wild scene.
Even though it wasn't like broken up like it was in Taymor's, it did feel like they were very like solid pieces where I knew what was happening with the Saturninus versus Bassianus. And then also Titus and the soldiers returning. It felt very clear and crisp.
Yeah. And then Tamara and her sons being prisoners and then not being prisoners anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also feel like this Andronici family was quite loving. The family all gets together and they hug. Like young Lucius is on stage and they take a selfie, as families do.
Yeah. When they're reunited after a bunch of them have been at war. Yeah. It was a nice 1-1. And I felt the same with 1-2 with Aaron, Demetrius, and Chiron. I actually have no notes about it. I was like, yeah, solid. Chiron and Demetrius and Taymor, they seemed like similar to the Chiron and Demetrius in Taymor's, but older.
And it seemed like their danger, it was very rooted in toxic masculinity.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, older and more toxically masculine.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Which that was much more successful to me. I liked, like you said, the age of Taymor's, but the motivation.
Toxic masculinity is a perfect way to put it. I was like, yeah, you could see these people as guys who are, you know, who work in like a corporate field and like party on the weekends and like don't really think about anything other than themselves. And then we're in the hunt.
In the hunt, just like the Taymor adaptation, Lavinia and Bassianus are mocking Tamara.
Mm-hmm. I think this one, it was done in a way where they were more interesting. Whereas Taymor's, for me, I was like, oh, this is really off-putting to these two. And I liked them so much because I had seen them interact and be in love. This one didn't foreground Bassianus and Lavinia having an existing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And their mocking was less cruel than Taymor's for me. It was more like, we don't like you, and we're gonna like be like, we see you.
Yeah, and we don't take you seriously.
Yeah. There's a brutalization of Bassianus in this piece.
Mm-hmm.
They cut off his penis pretty graphically. There's a lot of blood.
Mm-hmm.
The pit is real cool.
I thought so too. Before we get to the pit, I just want to say the graphic nature, we can talk about later, but it was very upsetting to watch Lavinia holding Bassianus and then also like have the brothers holding her and stabbing Bassianus. It was a very upsetting moment.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about how upsetting the Taymor one was. The Taymor one was also, watching Lavinia plead with Tamara was really, really brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, again, was also just brutal and devastating and really graphic and disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
The pit is literally in the middle of the stage. So actors were able to like fall into it. And I was like, oh yeah, well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
There was a really great pratfall with, I think, Mucius. When Mucius...
With Mucius and Quintus.
Yeah.
One of them falls, just whoop.
Yeah, he's like walking, doesn't see the pit, and then down he goes. He's gone.
Yeah.
It was fun. Which makes me wonder if the Globe did anything like that, because they have the pit for hell.
Funny. Yeah.
Although this is before the Globe, but if they redid Titus.
Yeah. In the aftermath of the rape of Lavinia, there is so much blood on stage. Chiron, Demetrius, and Lavinia are covered in it. And it presented a problem for me textually.
I also found it to be a problem from when Marcus found Lavinia.
Yes.
Yeah.
When Marcus finds Lavinia, she is covered in blood. There's blood pooling on her clothes in her genital area, and her pants and her underwear are pulled down.
Yeah.
And I wrote, how would you not know? When we read it, and when we talked about early modern law, they couldn't prosecute or do anything about it until they knew that someone had been raped and who did it. And I was like, so are we just going, he knows that she was raped and he just doesn't know who did it? Because there's absolutely no way that you could see somebody in that state and not know
what had happened, what the crime was. Right.
Yeah.
That's the problem I had with it as well. There's just no way. It was so unbelievable. First of all, it was unnecessarily bloody and graphic.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, I don't know how they would have thought this would have passed for audience members listening to these lines, to be like, yes, her loving uncle who wants to help her doesn't realize what happens when she is in this state.
Right.
I will say they shouldn't have made this decision, but it was quite tender when he did dress her, when Marcus did start to dress his niece. That was a very tender moment.
Mm-hmm. It was very tender. It is just that, like, he does not have any reaction to seeing her. And if you saw somebody, like, Shakespeare would have given us
language about blood.
Or an O.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Marcus does not react.
Yeah. Yeah. Based on early modern law with the hue and cry, he can try to prompt Lavinia.
And he tries to, but
you don't need to prompt somebody in that condition.
You don't need to prompt somebody. Yeah. The second act starts and they show the passage of time as well as the ghost ? Of Titus's sons.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm glad that's how you read that too. I was like, I think that's what they're doing, is that like Titus's sons are now present.
Yes, I read ghosts. I read.
Okay.
Yeah. I read ghosts.
And then they merged what I called the family dinner scene and the book scene, and I was like, I like that cut. They don't need to be separate scenes.
I also enjoyed that. I didn't even notice. It just flowed.
Yeah. just flowed. And another interesting change they made was because they were in a house and they had just had dinner, Marcus pours salt on the table and Lavinia uses the hilt of the knife to write Stuprum Chiron Demetrius.
I thought that was really effective and very smart.
Yeah, very smart. And then the table disappeared into the space that was the pit. And the pit came back as a pool. And I was just like, I really like that when we have a hole in our stage and the hydraulic lift, and we are going to use it multiple times.
Especially because it was a nice surprise for us in the audience, because Aaron is sitting out on the like beach chair, and Demetrius, I believe it was, is like
on a towel.
And then all of a sudden Chiron like pops out as if he had been swimming in the pool and he's like drying off. And I was like, I didn't expect that.
It was a really fun moment of theater.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I totally didn't write. This is going back. I totally didn't write about the hand scene.
Oh, yeah.
So the scene where Titus has his hand cut off, loses his hand, was such a cool theatrical special effect. They wheel out a surgery table, essentially, and the actor, very slyly swaps out his
real hand
for a rubber hand.
Yeah.
But he makes sure to move it so it looks like he's drumming his fingers, and then they saw through it maybe a little too easily.
I thought that as well.
But it is a cool, they tried to make this really realistic effect, and it's pretty effective.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a really good stage effect. So let's fast forward after the pool scene, which was cool.
Yeah. And then Titus was pretending at being mad.
Mm-hmm.
I really like this. I thought this was fun. The arrows scene was toys.
Yes.
That they shoot over. Super fun.
Yeah, especially watching Titus and young Lucius, who were the two who were in charge of this play military. And then the other adults were playing along, but it was really for young Lucius and Titus.
Yeah. Tamara becoming revenge. It was not my cup of tea, that revenge scene.
I also did not like it. I wrote that it dragged on.
It felt lackluster for all these other things that this production invested time in.
Yeah. And it was just such a slow pace. Everything was so slow. And it's it's also not the most interesting part of the play. So
yeah, and we're so close to the end.
Yes.
It was two concepts trying to be smashed together, and neither executed well, because I also struggled with Titus's pretend mad has taken on another form, and he's in a cardboard box, and he's got a beard, different hair.
I didn't like that, and that's because I tend to dislike when movies or plays use homeless imagery or unhoused imagery to say this is madness.
Yes.
That usually rubs me the wrong way.
I agree.
Yeah.
And for me, it was also we don't get an aside of Titus winking to us as the audience that he's not mad. And I was I actually prefer him being completely lucid versus this. Yeah, again, I was I feel like we as the audience don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and what we're gaining is that Tamara thinks that Titus is mad, but we don't gain any other information from him.
And at this point, we should be rooting for him.
Yeah. And I always do like a reveal, but I feel like
we needed to be in on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have liked to have been in on it, because I don't want the gotcha moment to be on me. I want the gotcha moment to be on Chiron and Demetrius.
Yeah.
And so we as the audience need to be in on it to really enjoy that moment for the revenge.
Speaking of gotcha for Chiron and Demetrius, that was a really epically staged death.
Yeah.
Again, a special effect that was really effective. Quintus and Marcius, the ghosts of them have joined in the kind of observing of the second half of the play, and they hold Chiron and Demetrius up as they're hung upside down by their ankles, and their necks are cut, and there's a lot of blood, and then Chiron and Demetrius are flown up and out.
Yes. Up into the rafters.
To the dinner scene. One big meat pie, I did believe.
Yes. I also believed it. And getting a little bit ahead of ourselves with the reveal, so grotesque when the flesh of the skin is
Oh.
pulled out
Yeah.
as if Titus has skinned just the facial
He kept
features.
their facial, and put them in the pie as a reveal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very gruesome.
Mm-hmm.
Another production that has Lavinia clearly, even more explicitly, consenting to Titus killing her.
Yeah.
Literally nodding and walking towards him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like, it was so fast. I appreciated that. I think that another production could try to draw out how quickly all of the deaths happen in that dinner scene. And nope, it's just all of a sudden, everyone's
bam,
dead.
bam. Mm-hmm.
Bang, bang, bang. And Marcus is running up to the steps of the Capitol to, tell everybody to calm down, and that Lucius is here. Now the Emperor.
Yeah, and then as Lucius is letting everyone know about the burials for each respective dead person, a seemingly alive ghost zombie, Alarbus, Tamara's son that was murdered in the beginning that set this whole thing off, walks up to the podium and grabs Lucius.
Yeah, so like we've talked about Titus's sons reappearing. For me, I was like, oh, this is all revenge, representing revenge, and how it's going to continue, essentially.
Yep.
So like overall, I liked this production. I think I would have liked to see it in theater, but fascinating to watch. Mostly, I think really interesting choices that mostly work.
I agree. Yeah.
I think we could say that about both of them, is like really interesting choices that mostly work.
Yeah, I think if you want to watch a Titus that makes more sense according to most of the text and my understandings of Titus' play, I would say watch the RSC one. If you want to see people getting creative and if you want to see a director being creative and making choices that are cinematic and artistic and visually interesting, watch Taymor. I don't think many of her choices made sense to me, but they're still interesting. And I think that there is room in filmmaking for films like Taymor's. I just wish that it was more holistic.
Mm-hmm. I think I would agree with that. I think I would just add, like, the Taymor is a really lean cut of Titus. And while the aesthetic choices were not 100% our cup of tea, someone might enjoy them.
Yeah.
And that was Titus Andronicus.
Another play done.
Yeah, a tough to swallow play done.
Which is perfect with all the meat pies.
Yeah, maybe our next play will have fewer food puns.
Yeah, specifically cannibal puns.
Let's choose one with less cannibalism next time.
Okay, deal.
Thank you for listening.
Our kind listeners, we can no other answer make but thanks and thanks and ever thanks to our Patreon patrons, Lisa Vanderkolk and Ashton Francine. I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Neverending Minute by Sounds Like Sander. If you would like to support us, it would help us out if you would hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it.
You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/Shakespeare Anyone.
Patreon patrons get access to exclusive bonus content throughout the year. The link is also in the episode description.
For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, follow us on Instagram at Shakespeare Anyone Pod, or Twitter at Shakespeare Anyone. For Twitter, that's Shakespeare Any and the number 1. Every other platform is spelled out like the name of the podcast.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here's a completely random Shakespeare quote for you. From Henry VIII, Act 2, Scene 3, said by Anne. I do not know what kind of my obedience I should tender. More than my all is nothing, nor my prayers are not words duly hallowed, nor my wishes more worth than empty vanities, yet prayers and wishes are all I can return.